Most people carry their regrets quietly. They fold them up and put them somewhere they do not have to look at every day. And they build their lives around the edges of those things they will not say out loud. Most people understand, instinctively, that there are words you do not say, not because they are not true, but because saying them changes everything, permanently, in a way that cannot be undone. Most people, on a Friday afternoon in the summer of 2024, in front of a live studio audience of 200 people and every camera that Family Feud had running, a man named Gerald Patterson said, "The thing that most people never say." He did not shout it. He did not say it in anger. He said it the way people say things that have been living inside them for a very long time, quietly, almost with relief, like setting down something he had been carrying alone for years. He said he regretted his marriage. His wife was standing 6 feet away from him when he said it. The crowd did not gasp. The crowd did not react at all. For a full 4 seconds, which is an extraordinarily long silence in a room of 200 people. And Steve Harvey, who has held a microphone in front of more human moments than almost anyone alive, stood at that podium and did something nobody in that studio had ever seen him do. He put the card down, he took off his glasses, and he said, "Wait, sir, say that again." Gerald Patterson was 58 years old. He had been born in rural Georgia, the son of a tobacco farmer, and a woman who took in sewing to supplement the family income. He had grown up understanding that life was a series of obligations you met without. Complaint that a man's worth was measured in what he carried and how steadily he carried it, not in what he felt about the carrying. This was not a philosophy anyone had taught him explicitly. It was something he had absorbed from the air of the place he came from the silences at dinner tables and the things his father never said. He had married Patricia Simmons Patterson 31 years ago. Patricia was 55, a former kindergarten teacher who had spent 22 years shaping the foundational years of hundreds of children before taking early retirement to care for her own mother through a long illness. She was a woman of profound warmth and deep reserves, the kind of person who remembered your birthday without a reminder, who brought food when you were sick without being asked, who never made you feel like a burden when you were one. People adored Patricia. The people who knew her well adored her most of all. The Patterson marriage looked from the outside like the kind of long marriage that people point to as evidence that it is still possible. 31 years. A house they owned outright. 3 adult children who came home for the holidays. Grandchildren who called Gerald Pop Pop and climbed on him like furniture. A Christmas card list that ran to 97 names. What the Christmas card list did not capture was the particular loneliness that can live inside a long marriage between two people who have stopped seeing each other clearly. Gerald and Patricia had grown, not apart, exactly, but around each other. They had developed the sophisticated co-navigation of two people who share a space so completely that they have stopped needing to speak to function. They finished each other's grocery lists. They moved through the kitchen without collision. They had, over 3 decades, built an extremely efficient partnership. What they had lost, somewhere in the accumulation of ordinary days, was the thread that had connected them to each other as individuals rather than as a unit. Gerald had felt this absence for years, but had no name for it and no outlet. He was not a man who talked about his interior life. He had not been raised to. He had instead done what he had always done. He kept going. He fixed what was broken around the house. He showed up for the grandchildren. He sat in his chair on Saturday mornings and drank his coffee and watched the yard and tried not to think about the specific quality of the silence that surrounded him. Patricia, for her part, knew that something was missing. She had known it for a long time. But Patricia was a woman who believed, with the bone-deep conviction of someone who had sat beside a dying mother for 2 years, that love was less about feeling and more about choosing, that you showed up, you stayed present, and you trusted that the warmth would return if you kept the fire going. She had been keeping the fire going for 31 years. She was tired, but she had not stopped. The Family Feud application had been submitted by their daughter Renee, who was 29, and who had her mother's warmth and her father's stubbornness in roughly equal measure. Renee had grown up watching her parents coexist in comfortable mutual silence, and had grown frustrated enough in adulthood to try to engineer a shared experience, something that would put them in the same room, laughing, competing, alive together in a way that their daily routines did not require. She had submitted the application as a surprise, and when the call came through with the invitation, both Gerald and Patricia had looked at each other across the kitchen table with the slightly stunned expression of people who have been gently pushed out of a comfortable rut. Neither of them had said no. That, in itself, was something. The full family lineup was Gerald, Patricia, Renee, their son Daryl, who was 33, and Patricia's younger sister Connie, who had driven up from Savannah and who had spent the entire drive telling Daryl what answers to give on every possible question. By the time they reached the studio, Connie had covered approximately 400 survey topics, and Daryl had lost the ability to form independent opinions. Gerald was quiet in the green room. He watched his family, Patricia laughing with Connie, Renee straightening everybody's collars, Daryl stress-eating from the craft services table. And he had the feeling he often had in family gatherings, that of a man watching a life he had built from a slight remove, as though through glass, present accounted for. Somewhere slightly elsewhere, the Patterson family was matched against the Washington family from Indianapolis, a lively, quick-reflexed group, anchored by a grandmother who had clearly watched every episode of the show for a decade and was operating with the confidence of a professional. The main game was energetic and close, with both families trading the lead across multiple rounds. Gerald was steady at the podium in the way that quiet men are often steady, unhurried, deliberate, accurate. He did not celebrate when he got the answers right. He did not react visibly when he got them wrong. He simply moved to the next moment. Patricia was warmer at the podium, more expressive, and the audience responded to her naturally. Connie was, as advertised, extremely well prepared. Renee was a competitor. Daryl recovered from his craft services overconsumption in time to deliver 3 solid answers in the final stretch. The Patterson family won the main game. The studio cheered. Patricia threw her arms around Connie. Renee grabbed her father in a hug that he accepted with a pat on the back, genuine in its way, slightly formal in its execution, which was exactly how Gerald Patterson expressed affection and had been for 31 years. For fast money, the producers selected Gerald to go first. He stepped to the podium alone. The audience settled. Steve ran through the setup. 5 questions, 20 seconds. The family needed 200 combined to win. Gerald nodded. The timer started. He answered 4 questions without difficulty. Clean, direct, no hesitation. On the 5th question, Steve asked, "Name something a husband wishes he could change about his marriage." Gerald answered immediately, "Everything," he said. The buzzer sounded. The audience laughed because Family Feud is a comedy show, and everything was a funny answer, and nobody in that room had yet understood that Gerald Patterson was not making a joke. Steve laughed too, initially. Then he looked at Gerald's face. Gerald was not laughing. He was standing at the podium with the expression of a man who has just heard himself say something true for the first time. Not distressed, not performing, simply arrived. As though the word had been waiting in his chest for a long time and had finally, in the noise of a game show, found its way out. Steve's laugh faded. "Gerald," he said slowly, "was that a joke?" "No," Gerald said. And then, because the question had opened something that 31 years of silence had not, he kept going. "No, it wasn't. I, I think I've been unhappy for a long time. I don't think I ever wanted this life. I think I just—" He stopped. He looked at his hands on the podium. "I kept going because that's what you do, but I don't know if I ever really chose it." The room went silent, not the polite silence of an audience waiting for the next moment. The genuine, collective held-breath silence of 200 people who have just heard something they were not supposed to hear. Something private and unguarded and irreversible. Patricia was standing at the side of the stage. She had heard every word. She stood perfectly still, her hands folded in front of her. Her expression unreadable in the way that certain expressions are unreadable because they contain too many things at once. Grief, recognition, something that might have been, surprisingly, relief. Renee had her hand over her mouth. Daryl was staring at the floor. Connie had gone completely still for the first time all day. Steve Harvey set the card down on the podium. He took off his glasses. He looked at Gerald Patterson, not with judgment, not with the polished empathy of a television host managing a difficult moment, but with the direct, serious attention of one man recognizing another man's pain. "Say that again," Steve said quietly, "because I need to make sure I understand what you're telling me." Gerald looked up. He looked at Steve Harvey, and then he looked at his wife, and the two of them held eye contact across that stage for a long moment. 31 years of mornings and dinners and silences and Christmas cards compressed into a handful of seconds. "I'm saying," Gerald said, "that I think Patricia deserved better than a man who stayed out of duty. And I'm sorry it took me this long to say it." The silence held for 4 full seconds. Then Patricia moved. She did not run. she did not collapse. She walked across the stage with the unhurried, upright bearing of a woman who has spent her entire life knowing exactly how to carry herself. And she stopped in front of her husband and looked at him for a long time without speaking. Gerald did not look away. What Patricia said next was not what the audience expected. It was not anger, which they were braced for. It was not tears, which they were also braced for. She looked at her husband of 31 years and said, quietly and without performance, "I know, Gerald. I've known for a long time. I just didn't know if you knew." Gerald's face broke. Not loudly. There was no dramatic collapse, but something shifted behind his eyes. The kind of shift that happens when a person realizes they have been alone in a room and discovers, suddenly, that someone else has been there the whole time. "Why didn't you say something?" he asked. "Why didn't you?" she said. Steve Harvey stood to the side of them, absolutely still, which was the most important thing he could do. He understood that he was not the center of this moment. He was its witness. His job, in this particular minute, was to make sure the room stayed safe enough for what was happening to keep happening. Patricia reached out and took one of Gerald's hands. Not a reconciliation. Nobody in that studio misread it as simple resolution. It was more complicated and more honest than that. It was two people who had been living parallel lives finally turning to face each other, in public, on a Friday afternoon in Atlanta, because a game show question had cracked something open that 31 years of polite navigation had kept sealed. "I don't want you to stay out of duty," Patricia said. "I never wanted that. But I also don't want you to leave without us having actually tried, really tried, not just kept going." She looked at him steadily. "I think we owe each other that." Gerald was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I think you're right." Steve Harvey cleared his throat. He stepped forward, gently, carefully, the way you move in a room where something delicate is resting. He looked at Gerald and Patricia, and then he looked at the audience. And then he said something he clearly meant with the full weight of his experience and his years. "I have stood at this podium for a long time, and I have seen a lot of families come through here. But I have never seen two people do what you two just did." He paused. "Most people spend their whole lives not saying the true thing. Because the true thing is scary. Because the true thing changes everything. You two just said the true thing to each other in public, in front of all of us, and then you chose to stay in the room. Together. That is not weakness. That is the hardest, bravest thing two people can do in a marriage." He looked at Gerald specifically. "Sir, you said you think Patricia deserved better. I'm going to tell you something. Saying that out loud, honestly, even here, even like this, that is the beginning of better. That is what better looks like when it starts." He turned to Patricia. "And you already knew. You've been standing in that knowledge for years, keeping the fire going, hoping he'd find his way to it. That kind of patience is not weakness either. That's love doing the hard, quiet work it does when nobody's watching." Renee, at the side of the stage, was crying without sound. Darrow had his arm around her. Connie had produced a handkerchief from somewhere and was not using it for herself. She was holding it ready for Patricia, who had not cried, and who received it with a small nod of thanks that communicated 30 years of sisterhood in a single gesture. Steve turned back to the podium. He picked up his card. He put his glasses back on, and he said in a voice that had recovered its warmth without losing its seriousness, "I think this family has a fast money round to finish, and I think Patricia Patterson is going to go up to that podium and show us all exactly who she is." Patricia looked at Steve. She looked at Gerald. She straightened her jacket. "Let's finish the game," she said. Patricia Patterson stepped to the fast money podium and delivered a round that the production staff would later describe as one of the most focused they had ever witnessed. She needed 151 points to reach 200, combined with Gerald's round. She scored 162. 3 of her 5 answers were number 1 on the survey board. When the final number appeared and the confetti fell and the studio erupted, Patricia stood at the podium and closed her eyes for a moment, not celebrating, not performing, but doing something private and necessary that the cameras caught anyway. Breathing. The Patterson family won $20,000. Gerald hugged his wife on that stage, a real hug. Not the pat on the back he had given Renee, not the functional embrace of two people who share a house. He held on. Patricia held back. The audience gave them the room to do it. When the episode aired 10 weeks later, it generated the kind of response that production teams spend careers hoping for. Not viral in the cynical sense, not shared for mockery or outrage, but viral in the way that things spread when they touch. Something true. The clip of Gerald saying everything at the podium, followed by the silence, followed by his explanation, followed by Patricia walking AC, Ross the stage. That sequence was viewed tens of millions of times in the first week. It was discussed in marriage counseling, waiting rooms, and church basements and kitchen tables all over the country. Marriage therapists cited it as a rare public example of what they called a relational rupture. That became a relational repair, the moment when the unspoken thing finally gets spoken, and the relationship either ends or begins again on honest ground. Several practitioners used clips from the episode in their sessions. One therapist, speaking to a podcast about the episode, said, "What Gerald and Patricia demonstrated completely without planning on a game show is something that most couples spend years in therapy trying to get to, the willingness to say the true thing and then stay in the room." Steve Harvey addressed the episode at length on his talk show, and the segment became one of the highest rated of his season. He was characteristically direct. "I want to say something to every man watching this. Gerald Patterson is not the villain of this story. Gerald Patterson is a man who was raised, like a lot of us were raised, to believe that what you feel doesn't matter, that you show up, you stay, you keep going. And the cost of living that way for 30 years is that one day, on a Friday afternoon in a TV studio, it comes out, because the truth always comes out." He paused. "The question is whether you say it in a way that can be worked with, or in a way that can't." Gerald said it in a way that could be worked with. He said it with honesty and with tenderness and with an apology. And Patricia met it. That is what love looks like when it's mature enough to survive its own honesty. Gerald and Patricia Patterson did not separate after the taping. They enrolled in couples counseling the following month, a fact they shared openly, because Patricia in particular felt that the visibility of their struggle carried with it a responsibility to be visible about the work that followed. "We didn't want people to see the hard part and then wonder what happened," she said in a brief statement, shared through their daughter Renee's social media account. "The answer is, we're doing the work. It's hard, it's real, and we're doing it." Renee reported 8 months after the taping that her parents had taken a trip together, just the two of them, no children, no grandchildren, to the North Carolina mountains, where they had spent their honeymoon 31 years. Earlier, she posted a single photograph, her parents on a porch, side by side, each with a coffee mug, looking at a mountain view. They were not touching. They were not performing closeness. They were simply sitting together, in the same direction, with the particular comfort of two people who have decided, consciously, deliberately, with full knowledge of the cost, to keep choosing each other. The caption Renee wrote read, "They're figuring it out, day by day. I'm proud of them both." The post received 40,000 responses. The overwhelming majority said some version of the same thing. This is what real love looks like. Not the easy version, the actual version. Steve Harvey referenced the Pattersons in a speech he gave at a marriage retreat several months after the episode aired. He did not name them. He never named guests without permission. But the story was recognizable to anyone who had seen the episode. He said, "The most dangerous thing in a long marriage is the thing you never say, because it doesn't go away. It grows. It becomes the furniture of the room you're both living in. And after a while you stop seeing it because it's always been there." What breaks long marriages apart, in my experience, is not saying the hard thing. It's the weight of every year you didn't say it. He paused. The bravest thing a married person can do is tell the truth to the person they married. Not perfectly, not without pain, but honestly. And then stay in the room and see what becomes of it. Gerald Patterson sent a handwritten letter to the Family Feud production office 4 months after the episode aired. He was not a man who wrote letters as a rule. The letter was brief and slightly formal, in the handwriting of someone who learned penmanship at an age when it was still taught seriously. It read, "I did not intend to say what I said on your program, but I believe it needed to be said. I am grateful to Mr. Harvey for the way he handled it with dignity and without making me feel ashamed of the truth. Patricia and I are working on things. It is slow and it is not easy, but I believe we are doing the right thing. I wanted someone who was there that day to know that." Steve Harvey read the letter privately. He did not share it publicly, out of respect for the privacy the Pattersons had not asked for but had nonetheless earned. He folded it carefully and placed it in the same drawer where he keeps the letter from, Linda Graves and the card from Angela Booker. He has said, in various ways and at various times, that the letters in that drawer remind him of something he tries not to forget, that the people who stand at his podium are not contestants. They are people. They bring their whole lives with them onto that stage. the things they are proud of and the things they carry and the things they have never said out loud. And sometimes, in the noise and the lights and the particular alchemy of a roomful of strangers all paying attention at once, the true thing comes out. Gerald Patterson said the true thing on a Friday afternoon in Atlanta. It cost him something real, and it gave him something realer still. The chance, at 58 years old, to stop carrying alone what had always been meant to be, carried together. Some people wait their whole lives for that chance. Gerald Patterson got his on a game show. He did not waste it.